golden formula is straightforward yet powerful. 1 degree equals 100 feet per nautical mile. This formula is foundational for pilots, simplifying what might seem complex at first glance. Building on this, 3 degrees equates to 300 feet per nautical mile. So for a standard 3-degree ILS approach, we are ideally positioned at 3,000 feet at 10 nautical miles. Now let us define the term speed number, a pilot-friendly way to gauge how many nautical miles you cover per minute. Here's how it works. Take your Mach number, let's say Mach 0.8. The integer component, 8, is your speed number. At Mach 0.8, you're cruising at approximately 8 nautical miles per minute. Combining the golden formula with the speed number, we can deduct how many feet per minute climb or descent rate we will have whenever we change 1 degree of flight path angle. During cruise, for a distance traveled of 8 nautical miles, 1 degree flight path angle implies a height difference of 800 feet. As we travel this distance in 1 minute, a 1 degree flight angle change upwards will thus result in 800 feet per minute rate of climb.
Keep that in mind in the remote case of an unreliable airspeed indication during cruise. In this case, as the safe conduct of the flight is not impacted, simply keep the present pitch. If one were to apply the memory items without further reflection and set the pitch at 5 degrees, coming from a nominal pitch in cruise of around 2 degrees, this would result in a vertical speed of 3 times 8 times 100, or 2,400 feet per minute, rate of climb. At cruise altitude, this would lead the aircraft into an undesirable situation within a matter of seconds. May I invite you to further develop your mental database by observing the behavior of the autopilot, as it is a great instructor and usually does a very good task in maintaining the profile. Observe the pitch variations by looking through the flight director anytime you are flying an automated approach. Flying an approach manually, you will then find the confidence to follow the flight director precisely and anticipate the result in vertical speed anytime you change the pitch. It is indeed very sensitive, and perhaps a bit surprising why the attitude indicator is not scaled per 1 degree intervals instead. Therefore, to further raise awareness of the scale, observe those pitch changes, for example, from cruise to descent, or from climb to level off, and verify the resulting change in vertical speed. This exercise will help you correlate the relationship of the pitch and thrust changes and their result in terms of performance.
See, at low altitudes, for example during approach, the speed number can be derived from the ground speed. Simply divide the ground speed, as found on the navigation display, by 60. For example, when the ground speed is 150 knots, the speed number is 150 divided by 60, or 2.5, meaning we fly at 2.5 nautical miles per minute. At this ground speed, descending on a 3-degree profile, we can deduct the vertical speed to be 3 times 250 feet per minute, or 750 feet per minute. Whenever we change the flight path angle by 1 degree with the given ground speed, the delta of the vertical speed will be added or reduced by 250 feet per minute. In the case of being high on profile, with the given ground speed, simply changing the flight path angle by 1 degree will result in a vertical speed of 750 plus 250 feet per minute, or 1,000 feet per minute. Thus, the correction on pitch will result in a smooth and controlled interception towards the approach profile. Once the aircraft is back on profile, pitch up 1 degree towards the original reference pitch, and you will find the required vertical speed of 750 feet per minute to continue the 3-degree descent profile.
The reference pitch defines the equilibrium pitch angle, the stable pitch observed by the pilot after establishing a consistent flight configuration. This determination is made by observing the aircraft over a period of 5 to 10 seconds. In atmospheric disturbances, such as turbulence or thermals, it represents the mean pitch angle about which the aircraft's pitch attitude fluctuates, effectively its center of equilibrium. By our own definition, the observed reference pitch for each configuration will be slightly different for each approach, as it depends on weight, center of gravity, and airspeed. Imagine a situation with strong headwinds, where ground speed mini is in effect. You will have a higher airspeed during the final approach. In this case, the pitch angle may be around 0 or 1 degrees, before the airspeed finally reduces as we are approaching the runway, with the headwind component reducing to its final value as reported by the tower. Consequentially, for the same configuration, as the airspeed reduces over time, the pitch will have to increase to maintain the same lift.
Normally, the pitch reference on the approach is around 2.5 degrees, so whenever making corrections, initially aim for a pitch of 3.5 degrees when low on profile or 1.5 degree of pitch when high on profile. Also, glance at the engine instruments whenever the auto thrust will adjust the thrust in function of the correction in pitch to maintain the approach speed. This is a good habit, since you will begin to build a mental database of reference N1 or EPR settings. On the Airbus 320, usually the N1 will be around 50% and 55% fully configured and established on approach, depending on the aircraft weight. During manual thrust situations, after a change in pitch, allow a few moments for the aircraft momentum to indicate the speed trend. When you see the pink speed trend arrow moving, adjust the thrust by 5% increments and allow for the momentum to stabilize around the new N1 value. From there, make 1 or 2% increments to keep the speed stable and allow again for the momentum to stabilize around the new values.
The golden formula also finds application in determining the optimal tilt angle for the weather radar. For example, setting the tilt manually to -1 degree will send the core of the weather radar beam along that slope relative to the horizon. At 40 nautical miles, the core of the beam will penetrate the weather at 40 times 100 feet, or 4,000 feet beneath the aircraft's reference altitude. This is why, before departure and during the approach, we have the tilt around 4 degrees pitch up, as at 40 nautical miles, the center of the weather radar beam will reflect the weather at 4 times 40 times 100 feet, or 16,000 feet above aircraft's altitude. A good altitude indeed to determine the intensity of the weather, as the highest intensity is generally found between 10,000 and 25,000 feet. Also, keep in mind the intensity depends on the type of precipitation, and above the freezing level, the intensity of the reflections are greatly reduced since we are scanning ice crystals rather than raindrops. During cruise, the pilot monitoring's display is best set at 160 nautical miles to provide for tactical analysis. The pilot flying's navigation display is best set at 80 nautical miles, an adequate range to decide on any required deviation. For the pilot flying, with the given range setting of 80 nautical miles, the tilt angle is set in function of the range, in this case around -2 degrees. With this configuration, the center of the beam will scan the weather ahead at 80 times 2 times 100 feet or 16,000 feet below the aircraft's altitude. Given a nominal cruise altitude of 34,000 feet, the center of the beam will reflect weather around 18,000 feet. Again, a good altitude to scan, to understand the intensity of the whole cloud.
It is important to be aware that the radar beam shape is not like a fine laser, but more like a cone-shaped flashlight beam. On a commercial jet, the width of this beam is around 3 degrees, meaning 1.5 degrees from each side of the center. Imagine, then, the reflected weather to be that inside of the cross-section of the beam. Nearby, that cross-section is narrow, and thus there is a risk to underscan or overscan weather nearby. That is why modern weather radars are equipped with multi-beam, where the lower beam scans weather at a much lower tilt angle compared to the main beam. Interesting to be aware as well is that the tilt angle displayed on the navigation display is the average of the lower and the main beam. Applying this further, when the pitch angle in cruise is found at, say, -15 degrees, the lower edge of the beam will be aimed around -3 degrees. Therefore, in cruise at, say, 36,000 feet, doing the math, 36,000 divided by 3 times 100 equals 120, meaning the lower edge of the beam will begin to reflect ground returns as of 120 nautical miles. This will become apparent as a well-defined solid band of returns as of this range onwards. Discovering weather inside of this band will then require a momentary manual tilt change upward.
We are now able to deduct the top of precipitation. In manual tilt mode, on the Collins multi-scan weather radar, the radar will revert to a single beam only, so we may assume the tilt angle to be that of the main beam. Now, begin to manually tilt upwards until no more returns are displayed. Note the present tilt value, deduct from it 1.5 degrees, to find the angle relative to the horizon of the lower edge of the beam. Given the following example, imagine we are in cruise, with the radar manually tilted upwards 1.5 degree. Now the lower edge of the beam is found at 0 degrees, meaning it is scanning precipitation at around the aircraft's altitude. For the next example, say the last returns are found with the manual tilt set at 0.5 degrees up. Consequentially, the lower edge is now aimed at 1 degree pitch down. If that return was to be found at, say, 60 nautical miles, then this would be indicative of a precipitation height of 60 times 1 times 100 feet or 6,000 feet below the aircraft's altitude. Note that the radar can only detect precipitation and not the top of the clouds, which may extend well upwards. In addition, with severe weather, the cloud may grow at thousands of feet per minute, and a turbulence bow may be expected above the cloud tops. That is why it is generally safer to deviate upwind and sideways of weather rather than attempting to overfly weather.